Hello my dear friends. In this video I will present to you 3 Reddit scary true stories. Let's start with the first story. The Walking Dead. I'm a psychiatric nurse. Early in my career, I worked at a residential mental health facility. There was a resident I'll call Marion Duckeen. He was an elective mute, which simply means that he couldn't talk, but there were no pathological findings as to why. He had spoken earlier in his life, and in fact seemed quite normal back then. With the notable exception of being close to 7 feet tall, he'd been raised in the Deep South and joined the military when he was 19. After boot camp, he was stationed somewhere in the South. One night, he just vanished. It was declared an AWOL for years, and finally he was declared missing and dead. 10 years later, a 7-foot-tall man walked into a VA hospital emergency room in my part of the Midwest and said to the receptionist, "My name is Marion Duckeen, and I've been dead for 10 years. Those were the last words he ever spoke. He was covered with dust and he was wearing the same clothes he'd been reported to be wearing the night he vanished. His social security number had not been used and he had no identification on his person. However, they were able to identify him, I guess via fingerprints. He was well fed and in good health, except for his refusal to speak. The family was notified, but they said they had already grieved their lost man, and that whomever was claiming to be him simply could not be. They said he was a haint and a stand-in for their dead relative, and demanded not to be contacted again. Marion paced all day every day, not in a frantic way, but just lumbering up and down the halls and outside. He smiled all the time and would be moving his mouth in a way that indicated talking or muttering, but he was dead silent. He had an unnerving habit of throwing his head back with his mouth wide open, as if he were laughing heartily, but not even a breath could be heard. If told to go to the dining room for a meal, he'd go and eat, but if nobody told him, he just kept pacing, never indicating hunger. If offered a cigarette, he'd smoke it in an oddly formal way, almost delicately, if that makes sense. But he never seemed to crave smoking. The man wanted nothing. If I talked to him, he appeared to listen, periodically throwing his head back in that laughter-mimicking way of his. There was nothing to do for this man. Various medications were tried, but they did not affect him either positively or negatively. Occupational therapy did nothing because Marion would just grin, and unless told to stay put, he'd get up and start pacing again. On my last day at that job, on my way to something better, the last thing I saw was Marion pacing in the parking lot, throwing his head back to laugh. Later I wondered if all along I'd been dealing with a ghost. All these years later, I still don't know. Story 2. The Unrest Stop. I was driving across country with my mom and sister. I was 16, my sister 20, my mom in her 50s. It was late, but we were well rested still and alert. We were driving along an interstate and needed gas, and they needed to pee. So we stopped at the only rest stop in 200 miles. There was a van full of teenagers on some road trip, and a small grey compact car, like a Honda Accord or some shit, parked at the pump in front of us. 2 men about 17 to 20 were standing outside the Honda in hoodies, statue fucking still. The teenagers were to our left. When we got there, everything felt wrong. There was a deep and unsettling feeling about the place, and we'd not felt that way at any other rest stop. We'd been on the road for days and seen many rest stops at night, and had never been afraid until then. My mom and sister went inside, and I stayed in the car. I heard the teenagers say they were creeped out and couldn't get the pump to work, and they left in a hurry. I was mostly watching the car in front, and the 2 men who had still not moved at all, not an inch. They weren't talking. They weren't on phones. There was no light anywhere but the dim overhead lights on the gas station awning. They were just fucking standing there, still as stone. My sister and mom came running back out to the car, and when they got in, the 2 men slowly turned to look at us while not moving or pivoting the rest of their bodies. And I swear to fucking shit, we all saw the same thing. They had eyes dark as pitch and empty. Truly empty. Not black. Not reflecting any light at all. Just a fucking void. We booked it. We have not traveled in excess of 100 miles per hour before or since. But fuck, that day it was warranted. We drove until we were in the next city before we got out of the car again. And you know the worst fucking thing about it? Not the eyes. Not the stillness. Not that horrible feeling. Not the weirdo in the gas station who kept telling my mom and sister my mama will like you over and over while mopping the same spot on the floor with a dry mop and an empty bucket. It was the fact that we couldn't find the place on any map. We knew exactly which spot on the interstate to look. And we couldn't fucking find it on Google Maps or any paper map we had. We even asked locals about the creepy gas station out on that stretch of road to confused looks. And are you sure you weren't traveling on highway and not interstate? We'd traveled on that interstate since and there was no rest stop. Story 3. He came to us at the cemetery. Years ago, a few friends and I went to hang out in a graveyard. Stupid thing to do for a bunch of bored 18-year-olds on a weekday night. But what happened next was very real to all of our experiences. We were driving my friend's really old beat-up Subaru through the massive graveyard. We stopped to get out and walk around. We walked down a hill and came across a little pond. There was someone sitting on a rock on the other side of the pond. The figure was all black, and we couldn't make out any features other than the fact it looked like a man who was wearing some old-style top hat. Stupidus waved and shouted hi. He didn't show any acknowledgement or wave back. The man sat on the rock. Still, all of a sudden, he jumped to his feet, started running to us on the water, and then vanished in thin about halfway on the pond. My friends and I screamed and ran back to her car. I didn't want to believe what we saw, but we all saw it happen. We got back to her car and tried to start it. It wouldn't start. Frantically trying to get it started, we all started panicking and getting very scared. That's when we heard some banging on the car from the back. It wasn't a constant bang, but every few seconds or so we'd hear it. Nobody was outside from what we could see in the dark, but something was making a noise on the car. At this point, I'm having a full-blown panic attack, screaming and crying to get us out. Luckily, my friends seemed a bit less panicky than I was and helped keep me calm. It was obvious that they were just as freaked out, however more speechless and pale-faced. We would have left the car in the graveyard and walked the long journey to the exit if it wasn't for the banging on the car. We didn't want to get out and leave. After about a minute, the banging stopped. I'll call my mom to come give us a boost, I thought. I'm not entirely sure why none of us thought to call sooner. However, I don't believe anyone thinks rationally while panicking. At this point, 15 minutes had gone by since we got back in her car. I opened my phone and started dialing and realized I had no service. None of us had any cell service. We bantered back and forth for a few more minutes trying to figure out what to do, and decided against leaving the car because whatever was outside was not what we wanted to come face to face with. The next 30 minutes was spent trying to get her car started. No banging was heard afterwards, but we felt this heavy feeling around us, almost as if it created this pressure on our chest. It's quite difficult to explain, as I've never felt anything like it before. Finally, her car started and she hit the pedal to the metal. We sped out of the graveyard so fast, immediately crossing the gates. All of our phones regained cell service. I'll never be able to explain what caused any of this or why certain things happened. One thing I know for certain is that someone or something was out there, and it was not an animal or human. If you liked the video, do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel to receive all new updates. Sweet dreams.